Joe Biden has finally done it. While America was distracted with the Trump show trial, we had Biden that gave Ukraine the A-OK to use U.S. weapons on the Russian mainland. This is a move that the United States has resisted thus far because providing weapons that will be used to strike Russia is such an obvious major escalation. And don't buy these bullshit headlines that are trying to paint the picture that somehow Biden was pressured to do this. This has been the strategy that NATO has been doing since the beginning of this conflict. The United States would draw a red line. A bunch of U.S. proxy goons in Europe would push the United States to change their red line, and then Biden would fold under pressure. We've seen this so many times. Quick question for all the NATO psychopaths. How does allowing Ukraine to strike into Russian territory change the trajectory of this war? It does not. The same way that sending the M1 Abrams tanks and fighter jets to Ukraine didn't change the war. Once you realize that NATO and the West, their only goal is to boost military-industrial complex profits and not win, everything starts to make more sense. The West has been very open about the fact that they are using Ukraine to test their weapons. Now they're trying to see how well their long-range weapons does against Russia. Joe Biden and the West are willing to risk World War III for a boom in the military-industrial complex. So, Nick, who do you think is winning the war between Russia and Ukraine? Raytheon!
What's poppin', my friends? Let me put that back up again so you guys know what this is really about. What's poppin', my friends, my family? Welcome. Banger after banger. I was putting a lot of work in the hotspot this week. 4 in a row for you guys. There's so much to cover, and the sad thing is I cut a lot. There were so many topics that we had to cover, but we don't have the time to edit these videos. You know what I mean? But as we had this ridiculous show trial, this political theater. You guys know I haven't covered it at all. Wasn't worth my damn time. I think it was funny. You had Civil War that was trending on Twitter, and then, like these MAGA people are so delusional, like as if people are gonna fight, die, kill their neighbors over their red-blue game bullshit. Like, no one believes he's even going to prison, and you guys think a civil war is gonna happen? You had all these old boomers out with arthritis and shit typing Civil War on Twitter. Isn't that sad? Doesn't that show how Americans think that they wanted to kill each other for red-blue bullshit? A very small amount. Yeah, Laura Loomer that was calling for the death penalty for Democrats. As if we're gonna fight and die. Are you guys gonna fight and die for the red-blue game? No, we just here to expose the contradictions in the system, take advantage of the chaos. And we have a banger of a guest today because this is what they were trying to hide. What I really care about is what you guys see what I made a hotspot video about. Was Biden giving the okay for Ukraine to launch weapons into Ukraine. And you guys see one of the main reasons why that is. And with that, I want to bring my guests in. I appreciate you making time for us. Amazing journalist, author, educator. You do amazing interviews, fantastic YouTube channel. Welcome to RB once again, Danny.
Hey, Nick. It's good to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to have you on. Like your channel, you've been doing a lot of great hard-hitting coverage on, especially on like Gaza, Ukraine, the experts that you have on. It's a fantastic channel. So I congratulate you on your success because those are the kind of channels that we need. The channels that don't spend their time on like nonsense, which is what the new era of RB is about. Expose what really going on with the decisions our government is making, which is why I cover the booms in the arms industry. That kind of stuff you can cover on your channel as well. So once again, thank you for coming on, Dan. To get started, because I know you follow this insane story, and I don't have time to talk about the bull. People are like, Nick, are you gonna talk about the Trump trial? I don't have time. Even if I did, with Haiti, what's going on with Kenya and Haiti, what's going on with Hezbollah. I'm gonna ask you about the Hezbollah strike. They downed a ton of drones. But let's get started with Russia, Ukraine. What are your thoughts about Biden giving Ukraine the AOK to strike into Russian territory, and your overall thoughts about the NATO strategy against Russia right now?
It's hard to know what that strategy actually is. The overall goal for NATO has been from the very beginning to do everything it can vis-a-vis Ukraine to weaken Russia, contain Russia, and ultimately break up Russia. It's been a longstanding policy of the United States, and the United States is the head of the NATO monster. The United States, all the way back in the early to mid 90s, had the Paul Wolfowitz doctrine that talked explicitly about breaking Russia up into pieces. This was during the golden age of US Russia relations, where the United States supported one of the most corrupt, goonish villains that has ever existed, really, in Russian history, Boris Yeltsin. It didn't really matter. The goal was still to break up and weaken Russia even further than the humiliation that Russia suffered between the years of 91 to 99. But now with Ukraine, the situation is just really, really, really poor for NATO. The conditions are just not favorable. They have admitted over and over again that Russia has seized the advantage in every single area of warfare. This includes, of course, across the board in terms of military production and weapons production. Russia's economy is growing at about 5% right now, which is absolutely huge and about double to triple that of any European country. So Russia's really in good shape. NATO isn't. And this escalation does appear to be a move out of desperation. And the one calculation that I believe NATO is making right now is that they believe that Russia's insistence on its openness for negotiations, the fact that it has shown time and again from December 2021 to April 2022, it has shown time and again it's willing to actually negotiate a settlement to this conflict. I think that the last thing that NATO believes it has right now is Russia's restraint and Russia's rationality, Russia's capacity to actually hold off on doing the unthinkable, which is leading NATO to believe that it can continue to move up its own escalation ladder so that it can tirelessly, but in terms of its effectiveness, it'll be an utter failure, keep Ukraine going to make this a forever war. I was on Sabi's show yesterday talking about this because I think that's ultimately the goal here. I don't, even though everything looks like this is the case, I don't believe the United States or NATO wants an open conflict with Russia, but they're looking at the options that are left on the table. There really aren't any. So this is the only move left. It's a way to try to satisfy Ukraine. You've seen Zelensky just absolutely tear into Washington. He's torn into Biden. He's very angry. Biden won't even go to his silly so-called peace initiative conference that will be held in Switzerland in mid-June. He's absolutely furious at Biden for skipping it in order to hobnob with rich donors because it's an election season. So there's no way that the United States and NATO want an open conflict with Russia. But that's what this will mean if the United States and NATO ultimately give Ukraine the open green light. I again told Sabi on her show, I was like, this is almost the equivalent of what Nikki Haley was doing in Gaza, in Palestine, in Israel, where she was signing on the bombs, finish them. It's almost as if the United States and NATO are not only giving Ukraine the weapons, but are then signing off on openly. It's something that's been happening, but now they're openly signing off on Ukraine hitting Russian territory, what they called old Russia, or essentially what Russia proper has been since before 2022. And that in and of itself, Russia, Vladimir Putin has said over and over again, Dmitry Medvedev, everyone has said that doing this amounts to an open conflict with Russia. And Russia has the right, whether Russia does it or not, is, I think, a question to we don't really want to ponder. But Russia has said over and over and over again that if these weapons are now green lighted to hit Russian territory, it's not just a Ukraine question anymore. It's not just Ukraine being desperate and killing civilians in Belgorod. If they start targeting Russian military assets inside of Russian territory with these weapons that the United States is now not just signing off on, there's coordination. We've known this. They're coordinating. The U.S., NATO personnel have been coordinating from the beginning. Now that it's open, now that they're talking about it openly, Russia has every right to strike military assets in the countries that are green lighting these
Do you think that's
attacks.
serious, Danny? Because
I do.
I in the past made the mistake of thinking that Iran and Russia are not as restrained as they actually are. I remember, and I'll take criticism because remember when the Iran Israel strikes were happening and Israel struck into Iran, I was like, oh shit, fuck, it's over. I was like, World War III, it's over. But I didn't give Iran enough credit, and I admit that because over time, Russia, Iran, and China, even with the incursion to Taiwan, you have the people that are called evil in our country, the axis of resistance. You have the United States who demonize China, who Iran and Russia, but they show restraint time and time again. But I want you to finish your thought. That's why I was wondering if you thought that is Russia serious here because they keep making these threats. What do you think, Denny?
Well, I do think Russia is serious. I also believe that Russia understands how important it is to be very methodical and smart about how its responses should go in order to prevent something that Russia also doesn't want. Russia doesn't want a total war with NATO. That would absolutely destabilize everything, no matter who has the advantage or who doesn't. It would destabilize everything because it inevitably leads to nuclear war. However, to think, I think the example of Iran is a very good one because Operation True Promise, while it didn't cause immense and enormous damage to Israel, it didn't end Israel, it wasn't a knockout blow. It did show both Israel and the United States what Iran can do. And I do believe that Russia is very much ready to show the United States, to show NATO what it really can do. And you even have think tanks in Russia. We've had academics, people who are close to policy circles in Russia already talking about what would it mean for Russia to detonate a strategic nuclear weapon to show the US and NATO that it has these capabilities. Now, what it means to detonate one, I don't think they're talking about actually hitting a European country with a strategic nuclear weapon. But what they mean more so is, does NATO and the United States need to understand that Russia is nuclear armed, that these provocations are inevitably leading to nuclear war? And do they need to be reminded that Russia has the ability to fight one if that's the kind of war that they are inevitably wanting? Because at the end of the day, all of this amounts to Russia feeling as if, and I believe this is a legitimate feeling, that its sovereignty is being encroached upon, that the United States and NATO have an ultimate agenda of subordinating Russia to its diktats. And that is something that Russia and 90+% of Russians just will not have and do not subscribe to. So inevitably, if this is the path that NATO wants to go, I do believe Russia is deadly serious. But I also believe Russia is also deadly serious about preventing this. So it's this interesting contradiction that, again, has the same root. The root is that there's only one side in this conflict that we cannot trust, that we can't have this same confidence in, and that is the United States and NATO side, because they've proven time and again that they are the ones who are the aggressors in this conflict, and that they're the ones who have every interest in keeping it going.
Yeah, well said, Danny. And I definitely gotta make sure I check out, and you guys should after we finish here, the show that Danny did with Sabby. I missed it. Like, damn. Apparently Danny's on the RBN tour this weekend. Banger after banger, my friends. There's so much to talk about. I already know we're not gonna get through it all. There's so much to break down based on what you just said right here. This is why I am concerned, Danny. And I am concerned because I've been wrong about possible Russia and China retaliation. I remember when Nancy Pelosi went to Taiwan, and I was like, "Oh, God, come on, guys! God damn it, stop!" And then China just did some military drills. So I admit I keep overestimating. Like these people are really restrained, and it's so crazy to hear people talk about the United States. I don't even want to say the United States enemy as if they're crazy. Russia is very calculated in everything they're doing. They were very calculated in Ukraine. But I am very, very concerned because look at the attitude. Danny, I want you to speak on it. Look at the arrogance. NATO chief dismisses Russia warnings of escalation after lifting arms restriction, and they are full of it. They know Danny, what's your thoughts on this? I got a lot to say. You have any reaction to this headline? Their constant denials of escalation, and this is what they're doing to lead the war, right?
Yeah, I mean, this to me is NATO again, not just underestimating Russia, but believing, and this is, I do want to hammer this point home, believing that that Russia's rationality. I believe that while they'll never say it, they're not going to say this publicly. They will say things like this publicly, but in their minds, in their heart of hearts, what they already know, what they've discussed in the back channels, in the back rooms, is that they know that Russia is the one here that does not want an ultimate confrontation, and that NATO right now, the United States, of course, the head of that monster, wants to exploit this. That's what they're hoping they can do. They can exploit this for a forever war. They can use it for political points, because right now they need to do everything they can to prevent anyone from looking at what's actually happening. The fact that the Ukrainian government is in shambles. It's a completely corrupt entity. It looks like the worst of the worst kind of neo-colony that's ever existed in the history of neo-colonies. I mean, it looks like an absolute out of control vassal state that honestly cannot shut its mouth. It's just shocking to me that the United States is in this position where it can allow, and it has allowed, someone like Zelensky to just exist as they are, because in the past, I mean, the United States, let's say in the African continent after World War II, whenever there was a leader that didn't, wipe their behind, right, they were gone. There was a coup, there was a military coup. That was it. There's no questions about it. Kwame Nkrumah talked about how there was coup after coup after coup after coup on the African continent with covert U.S. support. And that was because the United States was just shopping around for the best leaders to super exploit these former colonies. And Ukraine now is so valuable to the United States' ultimate objective to try to destroy Russia, no matter how much this objective is destined for failure. The United States believes it cannot do anything but what it is doing here, but explicitly provoking Russia so it can look strong. But be careful. I think NATO and the United States are just not thinking as clearly as we may think they do normally. They are actually just ignoring the possible consequences in the hopes that Russia will not retaliate in a way that they cannot stomach. They know that Russia is going to do something. They know Russia will pummel Ukraine further. They know Russia is going to keep moving forward. But can NATO, this is the calculation, can NATO keep Ukraine standing long enough perhaps to get through the November 2024 elections, perhaps to buy time for the United States and NATO to shift their priorities properly and try to divert people's attention to another conflict? These are the kind of calculations they're making, because the ultimate goal of full spectrum dominance just isn't tenable anymore. If Gaza, if Ukraine, if the Asia Pacific militarization strategy, if all of these just failures, then they are failures, are indicative of anything, it's that the United States just doesn't have the capacity to be the empire that it believes it can be.
And their empire managers are incompetent. I think there's a lot of arrogance too. And we was governed by a lot of psychopaths and maniacs like Henry Kissinger and the likes, but no one can doubt their ability to manage an empire. I think the Nepo babies in charge, I say this on RB all the time, I think the Nepo babies in charge legitimately don't have the ability to manage the empire. This is how empires fall all the time. Eventually, the people who take the reins, they're not as sharp, as intelligent. They become arrogant. They become lazy. And even like when you see Gaza, when you see them talk about Ukraine, any topic, they just arrogant and they lazy and they rely on censorship and remain in their social bubble to keep them insulated from being exposed. Now, even here, like you guys see the talking points that coming from this. There are a lot to expound on what you said as always, but let's start here. You guys, and I'm just now thinking about this as I'm showing you guys these headlines. I'm gonna see if I can find another one. But you guys notice that this is the messaging. I just now look at what they're saying here. Under pressure, Biden allows Ukraine to use U.S. weapons, as if Biden is under pressure. Like now, I'm seeing all these headlines. Like, what are you guys talking about? You guys see the narrative that being spent as if Biden is being convinced, but this is the strategy. Maybe you can speak more on this as well, because I remember they did this with M1 Abrams tanks. the fighter jets, where at first the Biden administration would say, "Oh man, that's our red line. We don't want to do that because it'd be too escalatory." And then some Eastern European or some European just in general, because I've seen the UK and France do this. I think it was the U. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the UK came out first with regard to tanks. It would be someone in Europe that would say, "Oh, I think we should cross Biden's red line," and then a few weeks later, Biden puts back. So I hate these headlines. I just now thought about this. Under pressure, there's no pressure. It's a game. So I want you to speak on that. One more thing, and I'll pass it back to you because we still got to cover a little bit of some Gaza as well. They are pretending that, and I want to get your thoughts on this as well. They're pretending that the reason why Ukraine is losing now is because of Mike Johnson and because of the Republicans. Because remember how they had a temporary stall on U.S. aid? And now that they made this deal, Mike Johnson, Trump included, all of these people sold out to the NATO war machine and decided to give an AOK to a Ukraine aid package. And I don't know how much you watch corporate media. It's a big problem. I've watched too much corporate media now. I talk about now. The narrative, because I watch a lot of corporate media, is Ukraine would be doing better right now if it wasn't for Trump and Republicans that stalled Ukraine aid. So I said enough. I just want to pass to you, Danny, for your thoughts on what I said in your response to this narrative that they're crafting.
It's all political theater. I mean, we just heard Donald Trump saying that he would bomb Moscow and Beijing if there is any Ukraine conflict or war over Taiwan under his watch. The truth of the matter is that this partisan play that the United States is trying to employ, the Biden administration really, and of course the very compliant corporate media, they're trying to find just any kind of way to explain how things are going so poorly in this conflict that it's really as simple as that, because the whole idea that the aid holdup is the reason why Ukraine is performing poorly completely negates the fact that it was the United States and NATO that armed Ukraine to the teeth for this so-called counteroffensive against Russia last summer, and Russia absolutely demolished that counteroffensive. It was a complete and total a waste. It was really a waste of, it was a waste of time. It was a waste of resources. Arguably 100,000 plus Ukrainian troops were killed just diving into Russian defenses. It was an absolute disaster. And Ukraine, truthfully, never recovered from that. It was completely irresponsible. It was all NATO's fault, because who was talking about this counteroffensive for about 6 months? It's a very strange phenomenon, a very strange way to wage an open kinetic conflict. This is the same NATO that talks about Ukraine as the biggest conflict in Europe since World War I. Well, if this is the truth, that it's the biggest conflict in Europe since World War I, why are you fighting it? But why completely telegraphing everything you're going to do? Because you don't actually care about the warfare aspect of this. Ukraine is not the concern here. What the concern here is politics, is empire. It isn't about what Ukraine can do or cannot do. A lot of this is political theater. The arming of Ukraine was a complete disaster. And now we are seeing all of the various ways that these desperate capitalist corporate elites, these warmongers, they are just trying to find a way to blame something. Trump is always very convenient, because at the moment, Trump is not president of the United States. Trump's rhetoric is easy to grab onto, because he has said he wants to disband NATO, which was nonsense because he didn't do anything of the sort when he was president. But he continues to say things, disbanding NATO or making NATO countries pay more, ending the conflict in Ukraine. So all of that is just such red meat for the neoliberals and the neocons, who can then say, look at Donald Trump. He is the big danger. He wants to end the conflict, God forbid. Yeah. And that means we won't be able to alter the situation in favor of both Ukraine and NATO, which they constantly tell us is going to happen any day now. Ukraine will turn things around. Or now the narrative is, well, Ukraine has already done so well. As long as Ukraine is standing, as long as we can beat back Russia's continued advance, then it's a massive victory. So the goalposts keep moving. it really it is a very interesting historical moment when it comes to the U.S. empire, and of course its fading European vassals. They are all just so desperate to maintain what was a historic miscalculation on their part. They truly believe that this was the time where they could lay a knockout blow to Vladimir Putin and Russia. And in fact, it's almost like when you're at the arcade and you're playing that game where you like punch the bag as hard as possible to see how strong you are. Well, it's almost as if the bag just completely came right back into their faces and laid its own kind of knockout blow onto the U.S. empire. That's really how things are turning out, and the desperation, as you have shown in these headlines, is just so palpable. Joe Biden is not under any pressure. There's no pressure on Joe Biden. Joe Biden is the one who is pressuring this on Europe first, which has been the case throughout this conflict. Push Europe into a harsher and harsher stance on Russia. It started with the sanctions, started with the arms. Of course, European countries have much smaller militaries than the US, but it started with getting European countries to take a much more hostile position on Russia than they ever had in the past since the fall of the Soviet Union. And all of this has led to Europe's complete self-destruction. But it's also led to now blaming that this is who they're blaming. They're blaming Europe, the United States, for this, because a lot of European countries actually gave the green light first. The UK, France, Belgium, these countries gave the green light for their weapons to be used on Russian territory first. So now the United States is saying, oh, wow, that's just a lot of pressure. Biden's under a lot of pressure. He now has to do it too. It's political theater. It's a game. The United States was the one all along pushing for this. They just like to use Europe as their test dummies first.
Yeah, isn't it funny? Because I still remember the headlines clearly, what it was saying at the beginning of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, how Putin made a giant miscalculation, and it was, and the commentary from especially the liberal wing of corporate media, like the MSNBC, CNN, was insufferable because they're saying, "Oh, this will lead to the downfall of Putin." The historians will remember this moment as when Putin overreached. Now look at where we are now. Think about how many European leaders have fallen since then. how many prime ministers have the UK been through since then? And I would love for you to either correct me or speak more on this as well. But the sanctions regime on Russia, complete failure. As far as I'm, obviously there probably was some pain felt maybe somewhere, but it was a complete failure. The only thing it did was lead the drive to de-dollarization, which we've been covering on the channel. You see a lot of these countries are saying, oh, if the United States can just disagree with any foreign policy decision we make, and they just put us under sanctions and ruin us economically, which they've been doing for decades. And this bit us in the ass. These sanction regimes that put 1/3 of the world's population under sanctions. So I'm gonna read this super chat, this very generous super chat from Landrew, and I'll pass it to you if you have anything you want to add. Thank you, Landrew, for your very generous super chat. Give some love to Landrew. Big appreciation to them. Caitlin Johnson, you guys know how much I love Caitlin. She's the GOAT. Like, bro, she just writes stuff and I'm like, God damn, that's good. I wish I would have came up with that first. Like that's my reaction whenever I see Caitlin Johnson on Twitter. Like, damn, wish I thought of that first. But anyway, Caitlin Johnson has a new article. There are no governments, only a military empire. Jill Stein for peace. Absolutely. Everything makes sense when you realize that everything is about the military industrial complex. As I showed in my hotspot video you guys seen, there are a lot of questions about why the West is making all these decisions, but it can be solved simply when you realize that Raytheon doubled their stock value. But anyway, there are a lot to add to there. Danny, anything you want to chime in on before we move on?
Well, I appreciate Caitlin Johnstone's work, especially her writing, because it's so concise, and also you can tell that she does other kinds of written art forms, the poetic ways that she's able to put things and also put that emotion behind it is great, because I think it is very effective, and it's obviously impacted people in a really positive way. I mean, you know, remind me what the topic was again, the subject for this.
We pretty much just talking shit about how the West made a lot of miscalculations, the sanctions regime that led to de-dollarization. But go ahead, go ahead. I know I'm a rambly motherfucker, but go ahead.
No. The sanctions. Well, it's interesting. Somebody said, "When have sanctions ever worked?" And I think that's a really great point, because if we measure sanctions and their effect as an act of war that has starved and created untold misery in places like Iraq and places like Syria, we can say, okay, U.S. sanctions, UN sponsored UN sanctions, whatever they are, they've been effective. But when we actually look at the ultimate objective, similar to what I always say about Gaza, right? If we measure Israel's effectiveness in this so-called military operation, genocide on Palestine, on Gaza, then if counting Palestinian dead bodies and mass murdered babies and things like that, if that's a measure of effectiveness, sure, Israel is doing great in this war. If we measure it in terms of what Israel actually wants to accomplish here, then Israel is a miserable failure, because Israel actually does want to eradicate Hamas. Maybe some people disagree with that, but I do believe they want to eradicate the Palestinian resistance. Why wouldn't they? If they truly want to empty out Gaza and eventually settle it, or whatever people think, which all could be very plausible, well, they're going to have to get rid of the Palestinian resistance, and they can't. So that's a failure. The same with sanctions, right? You can look at any government that's been sanctioned over the past several years by the United States. Look at Syria, Venezuela, now Russia. We can go on and on. China. Have any of these governments, have any of these leaders, have any of these states, these nations become weaker in terms of their political cohesiveness, their sovereignty, their self? No, all of it has actually strengthened. It doesn't mean people, especially in Syria, for example, which is under some of the most stringent and tight and criminal sanctions, are not suffering. Indeed, there is suffering, but does that mean victory? Does that suffering mean that the United States has won? No, because Bashar al-Assad is still wildly popular, and the Syrian people are very much, if much more united than they've ever been, to protect and defend their sovereignty and to move forward with a future that is available to them. So the same goes on and on and on. And then we look at the question of Russia. Well, the sanctions have never been more of a failure and more of a miscalculation than with Russia, because Russia is a bigger country. Russia is a country that is an energy hub for the world. Russia is a critically important economy for the world. And so by attempting to sanction it, what actually the United States and NATO did was to isolate themselves further. Because what happened is that the global south and the global majority coalesced around Russia. There was no separation from Russia. Actually, the most important countries, the most progressive countries in the world, decided that they were going to step up their support for Russia, their economic activity, their trade. This includes China, this includes Iran, and then we can go to Latin America. This includes places like Cuba and the like. So countries around the world, on the African continent, Asia, and Latin America, have all coalesced around Russia and have seen their cause as their cause. Because ultimately, as you said, Nick, so many countries around the world, when you look at the 30 plus countries, the massive amounts of people that makes up about a third of the world's population under sanctions. When we look at these countries, they all share a similar dynamic. They're all mostly sovereign countries, countries like Belarus, countries like Syria, countries like China. These countries are sovereign. They have their own political and economic path that they're following. They do not bow down to the United States or the collective West. They want a fairer world. They represent what is a vestige and a continuation of a historical process of decolonization, of anti-imperialism, of independence and self-determination. So it's these countries that receive the harshest of treatments. It's these countries that are ultimately the target of the most brutal sanctions. But it's also these countries that have the most political cohesiveness. They have a political vision. They have a society that is generally organized and mobilized to meet their national interests. And so these countries end up surviving. And what has happened with Russia is that not only has Russia survived, not only has Russia been able to ensure that these sanctions haven't had the political impact, but the economic impact has been almost non-existent, because what Russia did was it became more self-reliant, and it did namely do what the United States in its own kind of context did during the Second World War, when there was a Great Depression in the United States, when there was one of the worst economic crises in its history. The United States turned inward. It decided that it was going to use all kinds of federal spending and subsidies to really militarize its economy. But that federal spending into the military had ripple effects in all levels of industry. And that led to, after World War II, when the United States was the unquestioned last remaining empire in the world, that led to the United States being able to come out of the economic crisis. And so Russia did this in many ways in much more spectacular fashion because of how quickly it had to get done. Russia saw that it was under sanctions. It saw that it was engaged in a literal active war. So it did what the United States ultimately did, which was turn inward, focus on the rapid development of industries, step up government support for all sectors of the economy. And this has led to Russia being able to stabilize its economy in an unprecedented fashion, because unlike the United States, Russia is under 16,000 sanctions, and they keep on growing. But ultimately, Russia is not the one that's isolated, because it does have not only its big best friend in China, but also has Iran. It also has much of West Asia. It has the African continent, where many African countries view Russia very favorably. The same goes in Latin America. There is a long history here. It dates back to the Soviet Union, where the global majority and the global South still see Russia as a pole that is worth defending, more identifiable with them than, of course, the US and the collective West, which have a completely different history with these parts of the world. This history is rife with empire, colonialism, massive destruction, the imposition of poverty, and the most humiliating kind of colonial and neo-colonial regimes. This is not the kind of future that much of the world wants. But when they look at Russia and they see, wow, okay, Russia stood up to NATO. It stood up to the United States. It made a first move, so to speak. Of course, we can say the United States and NATO were provoking. But Russia said, no, we're not going to allow these provocations to continue without there being consequences. That's what the Ukraine conflict has been all about. It's been about moving toward objectives in an offensive posture. People may not like that, of course, because there's a framing. It's defensive. Yes, it is, but it can be both at the same time. It's about Russia saying that there were too many crimes being committed against Russian people in the Donbass, that NATO was encroaching on its borders, and now Russia has to take an offensive step, to take a step forward to tell NATO and to tell the United States that it's going to have to stop, or it's going to face huge consequences. And that has been an inspiration. People don't want to hear this, but it is an inspiration to people all over the world who have been trampled on, who have been absolutely humiliated by what the US and NATO axis have done to them and their parts of the world for decades and decades.
Yeah, well said. There's so much really well said explanation there. I'm glad that you touched on a lot of those things. And that's why a lot of people, and if you haven't, make sure you guys subscribe to Danny. This is exactly why you're seeing a lot of success, because the wealth of knowledge and the explanation behind the moves that the empire is making. That, and we have so much to cover. We can do this forever, but I want to make a few shout outs real quick, because we still haven't touched Gaza yet. So we gotta touch on that on a second. I want to read the super chat by John. Thank you for the 999, John. How can the younger anti-war left and the United States build solidarity with each other and solidarity with the axis of resistance internationally to contain the older warmonger imperialists in the United States? Now, I was going to save this. Let's see, how should I do this? I was about to save this. I guess we can kind of lightly touch on this, because I'm gonna show you guys in a nutshell how I will answer this question. The question being, how can the younger anti-war left build solidarity with the axis of resistance? And Danny, I want your thoughts on this, because we were going to talk about this later. I decided to bring this up a little bit earlier, because this is what you don't do if you want to build solidarity with the axis of resistance. And this is exactly why we was not okay with Nina Turner being associated in any way, shape, or form with RBN at all. She is a sellout. I called her out when she ran for election. I was live on Jimmy Dore show. That's when she unfollowed me, because she thought we was cool. I was like, nah, we're not cool, bro. Like, the way you moving, not okay. For example, the way she condemned BDS. I want a few people to cover that. She, in order to win over the AIPAC lobby, she said she didn't support boycotts on Israeli businesses that supported the Zionist project. So there was a roundabout way of condemning BDS. And then I don't feel free to chime in. I know you want to chime in, but I'll just read this tweet. I want to get your thoughts. And this, I kind of use your super chat, John, as a way to transition to this mini segment. So I appreciate it. I want your response to Nina Turner here, where she's getting dragged and exposed like she should, where she said arrest Netanyahu and Hamas leaders. Danny, any response? We don't want to spend too much time on it, but I want to get your reaction to this.
Yeah, well, it's not surprising because the ICC left it open. I wasn't surprised by the ICC order to both arrest Netanyahu and add in the Hamas leaders. That's not surprising, and I'm a little less angry about that than people who are supposed to claim. The ICC has never claimed that it is some kind of arbiter for the kind of justice that me, you, and people who watch your show want to see. It doesn't have the necessarily best record in this regard. But when it comes to Nina Turner and people like this, I mean, it just exposes what both it shouldn't be done, as you said. We should not be condemning the acts of resistance of a people that has been so oppressed, so colonized, so stripped of their right to self-determination. That is exactly the opposite of what we should do. But what we should do is the exact opposite. I think the only way that we develop solidarity with resistance movement like which exists in the region of West Asia and beyond, the axis of resistance of Iran and Ansarallah, of Hezbollah, Kataib Hezbollah, the resistance in Syria, etc. The only way we can be Al-Qassam and the other Palestinian resistance groups, the only way we can express our solidarity is to talk about them differently, because either they're ignored entirely or they're viewed as just a bunch of gun-toting terrorists. I mean, that's been the big problem for the political discourse in the collective West in the United States. I mean, I know you covered, I remember watching this, your coverage of what Tulsi Gabbard had to say about Israel and why Israel is so right and Ukraine is so wrong to be supported, right? It's so right to support Israel, so wrong to support Ukraine. Why? Well, Ukraine's not going through some quote unquote Islamist, jihadist, extremist attacks, right? She was just doing what she has done, to give her credit and to also give myself a self-criticism for maybe overlooking this a bit. She's always had this rhetoric from the very beginning, okay, Islamist jihadists, but at that time you had the United States supporting literal jihadists in Syria and Libya, etc. So we had this experience of, okay, yeah, there is a difference between, let's say, jihadists supported by NATO in the United States and Syria versus Hezbollah in the south of Lebanon, for example. Like those are two completely different things. But not to Tulsi Gabbard and not to the vast majority of those in the political class, even those who claim themselves to be progressive. They view Hamas as evil. They think Hamas is the problem. Oh man, look at what Hamas did on October 7th. This and that, hostages, blah blah blah, right? Like this is the narrative that they have also consumed, because they know if they go any further that AIPAC is going to end their careers. They are much weaker. This is what they don't want to also acknowledge, is they are much weaker than the Israel. They know that they have no support within the political establishment, but they have no faith in the masses of people, because if they did, they would understand that the vast majority of people in the United States and the collective West and the world want to see people actually have a backbone, stand up to the Israel lobby, stand up to those who are pressuring and ultimately controlling in many ways U.S. political campaigns and discourse like that. They want to see that. But Nina Turner, this is the big problem with Democrats. They have no faith in the masses of people, because ultimately they view them as exploited subjects. I mean, they are people to exploit, whether it's for votes or whether at the end of the day it's someone like AOC who, predictions of her becoming another kind of Nancy Pelosi were just so spot on, because now that's who exactly she acts like. She acts like the early Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, nobody remembers, but she actually had, in the beginning of her career, a progressive veneer. She wasn't someone that people in the mid 1990s viewed as some kind of corporate shill. Like, people didn't talk about Nancy Pelosi like that. She was supporting single payer back in the mid 90s, late 90s, when people were talking about single payer before the Bush 2 era. That's who she was. She's from San Francisco. It's a little more liberal, a little more lefty, a little less neoliberal. But I mean, that is, that is a narrative that's been completely dropped. And look how fast people like AOC have dropped their so-called progressive pretenses. And the same goes for Nina Turner in not having the backbone or the spine to just outright and forthrightly support the resistance, support the Palestine solidarity movement. That should be a bare minimum. Let alone if you want to go further, which I think we need to do. I think we need to talk about the axis of resistance. I believe we need to counter and fight back against their demonization. Iran, Ansar Allah, Hezbollah, Kataib Hezbollah. These aren't evil people. If what kind of evil people want to end a genocide? It's a ridiculous assertion, but unfortunately, with all of the long history of not just of U.S. support for Israel, but of course of the U.S. trying to dominate and occupy this part of the world, this is what we're left with. We're left with politicians that are more concerned about their political future, their careers, their ability to win elections under the current arrangement, rather than trying to do something, be some kind of force. If it destroys you in the short term, it destroys you. But that is part of the sacrifice that anyone who has any kind of influence, like these kind of folks do, who claim that they're part of a movement, should be willing to. These are the things that they should be willing to do in order to move things forward in the right direction. So that's my, I guess, my brief reaction to this.
And it's like, this is the kind of shit that irritates me, my friends. Because you guys see that Nina's getting dragged, bro. It got worse since the last time I seen it. It's got, bro, JB, everyone in the RBN family is just dragging her. She getting ratio left and right, and this thing is way worse when I saw it originally. Because you guys see this one here, very disappointing. And what did I say on RBN? I don't consider you good on this issue if you condemn Palestinian resistance. So there are people who do good coverage of this. Like Crystal Ball would do good coverage of Israel government, but she condemns Hamas. I don't consider her ally in this fight. It's just that simple. It is that simple. Like, because these people, and I talk to people in the resistance. You guys see the Palestinian Community Network. I have a Palestinian roundtable, another one I'm going to plan here in next week or so. And I got deep contacts with people in the Palestinian resistance movement who I'm more than happy to platform whenever the fuck they hit me up. I tell them anytime. So we got another one planned. When I talked to them, they said the people who irritate them the most are the people who have solidarity with their corpse, but not with their rockets.
Yeah.
Let me repeat. Yes. And this is not my quote. I got this directly from them. Mm-hmm. They hate the people who have solidarity with their corpse. With a dead Palestinian children, they had solidarity with them, but they won't have solidarity with their rockets, with their ability to resist. And the reason why this is extremely dangerous and why the left must resist this, because the only reason Nina Turner comes to this conclusion is because she's an institutionalist who believes that Palestinian resistance should come through the lens of institutions. That's not how South Africa was liberated. That's not how liberation movement works. It's the professional managerial class being purposely dense. Hamas has the legal right to engage in anti-colonial struggle, period. End of story. What Hamas did was engage in successful anti-colonial resistance. So what these people will say is, oh, we believe that Palestinians should be liberated, but they can't be too successful at it. October 7th was too successful. You guys are too good at killing IDF soldiers. Let them win. So that's why Nina Turner wants them prosecuted. Nina Turner wants Hamas leaders prosecuted because they led to a Palestinian resistance victory. They are the biggest scum, and this is what I learned from my Palestinian brothers and sisters. This is not me. The same way I want people to learn about Black liberation from me and my friends and family, the same way I learned about Palestinians from them. I don't make this shit up. This comes directly from them. That's why she's getting dragged. And this is another response. And feel free to cut me off if you want to, Danny, at any time. But here's Nina Turner. The ICC process should play out in the court. As Israel don't give a fuck about international law. How many people have been slaughtered since the ICJ ruling about Rafah? He said, and we should respect that. I support Palestinian liberation. This is not an unreasonable position. So I support Palestinian liberation as long as they're unsuccessful. If they become too successful, then I will condemn them. You should lock them up. Now, one thing I want to add, anything you want to add, Danny? I'll pass to you. Anything you want to add real quick?
Well, one thing about this that maybe isn't getting attention, or maybe it is in the back of people's minds as they're reacting, rightfully so, angrily at what Nina Turner is saying here, is that if we are to just take on face value this notion of letting the court do its job, well, then we should actually be pushing back even harder against the notion that Hamas leaders should be arrested, because right now Hamas isn't the one that's on trial here. It actually is Israel is the one that has a standing indictment, a standing investigation into whether it has committed genocide in Gaza or not. And so that is the process. If there's any court procedure that should be allowed to be allowed to stand, it's that one. This here is, regardless of the reactions from Israel and the United States, which were very, very, very hostile to Netanyahu being lumped in with Hamas for arrest. For our purposes, it actually isn't as helpful as we may think, because it does make this false equivalency. And this point that you made too, it always frustrates me when it comes to the so-called left. This idea that an oppressed people deserve solidarity when they're at their weakest, when they're at their most vulnerable, when they're at their most humiliated position, versus when they are fighting back, when they're in a stronger position, when they are winning. This is most, I believe, visible, most apparent when we're talking about liberation movements that have won, whether it's in China, whether it was the Soviet Union before that, whether it's the various governments on the African continent, Libya, whether we're talking pre-2011, whether we're talking about Syria today, whether we're talking about Iran, right? These are all countries that have had liberation movements that have won. And so these end up being the countries that have been the most vilified and demonized. And of course, the same was even true in Iraq, or whatever we thought, Saddam Hussein, all this. There's plenty of reasons to have been critical of Saddam Hussein, but Iraq, the system that existed in Iraq for many, many years, while it wasn't perfect, it was also the product of a larger pan-Arab movement, an Arab nationalist movement that was progressive on its face, was about the liberation of the Arab world from the Sykes-Picot colonial arrangements of the late 19th century, early 20th century. And so all of that is to say is that it just so happens that the United States, the empire, the collective West, they're always looking to overturn and destroy these governments, and of course the movements that maybe haven't won. But when they are succeeding, that is when the punishment, the warfare, the terrorism, the now we're seeing a genocide. This genocide is punishment to the Palestinian resistance for taking such a bold move and being very effective in doing so. And so it is incredibly frustrating to watch liberals, to watch so-called leftists play along with this false equivalency, and allow themselves to become kind of useless arbiters of it, because you become essentially rendered useless when you do not take a firm stance on the side of the oppressed. This is people who are on the outside of this question. Really, you don't have the luxury. You shouldn't have the luxury to say, well, Hamas is bad too. You just don't have that luxury, because there's only one people here that are sacrificing literally everything to win their liberation. That's the Palestinian people. So you should probably listen to them.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And you see she being cooked, and this is why it's frustrating, because I've seen a few clips of Nina giving speeches about Palestine, her tweets, and these people get tricked by these progressives all the time. That's why it's frustrating. And that's why she's getting dragged so hard, because there's a lot of these people, and let me see if I can find that one that's disappointing. There are a lot of people like, oh my God, I can't believe Nina is selling us. No, she always been this way, guys. This is what the professional managerial class does. And they always go through this process when people realize, oh man, they're not really about it. They know what's popular. She's a politician. She's a politician in aspiration. She knows that that standing for Palestine is the popular position if you want to pretend to be progressive. But then I look at what really draws, what will make you real and will make you fake. And it will make you real, will make you fake, as far as I'm concerned, is whether you support the liberation of the Palestinian people against these terrorist Zionist thugs at all costs. Now I'm trying to be as quick as possible. We're gonna wrap up here soon, but the reason why I explained many times in a human humanizing these people. I know Americans struggle to humanize other people because not only does Hamas have the intellectual right to defend themselves, the legal right to defend themselves, but if you boil it down to humanity purposes, I explained many times before. If I'm gonna think about the people in my family, you guys know a lot, like my niece, for example. My niece. I posted a video of me training my niece in Muay Thai on Twitter. You guys seen her. Literally the joy of my life. If there was a hostile foreign government that did to my niece what I have seen done to these Palestinian children, sign me up to Hamas or whoever the fuck is down to do whatever. Like, just the thought. I'm like, imagine my niece, imagine my younger cousins, my brother, he has a son. Like, imagine these people getting just bombed. And then they're like, oops, sorry, we bombed the family. Nigga, I will sign up to Hamas the next day. What are you talking about? You want to condemn them? I'll be like, nigga, Hamas is too moderate for what I want to do. Imagine if you had, because I have an older mother. I have a lot of seniors in my family. Imagine if your mother, your aunt, your grandmother was forcibly evicted from their home at gunpoint. You tell me you as a man wouldn't be down to join Hamas? What kind of man are you if you wouldn't be down to join Hamas after that? And what kind of man will you be if you wouldn't want to defend your community against these terrorists? I just got two examples. I can show you guys thousands of these. And the reason why I not only refuse to condemn Hamas, I root unapologetically for Hamas and Hezbollah and Ansarullah because they're fighting monsters. The same way I will root for the Red Army against the Nazis. The same way you root for anyone fighting the Nazis. Listen to this video and tell me why you would condemn anyone fighting this guy. So I just play.
IDF fighting the Kamis or the Hamas?
No, we don't. We kill everybody. No Hamas.
He said if you can't understand the accent, we kill everyone, not just Hamas.
Everybody.
Yes.
Even the children.
And the children.
The women.
Children and babies. Baby, one day we kill him.
On the first day it's born.
Yes.
Why no? How many do you have? How many kills do you have?
Watch this, Danny. This is crazy.
1 minute. Because I don't English.
So he can't speak English that well. So he asked how many people this person killed. This shit is literally crazy. Even if he's lying, half the number that he about to show you on the screen is still the craziest thing you ever heard.
Very good.
You guys see that? He said we kill everyone. Children, babies, everyone. When asked how many people he killed, he said 20,000. I saw you on mute, Dane. So do you want to chime in?
Oh, no. I was just,
yeah.
I mean, there's so much you could say about this level of barbarism. I would highly doubt. I mean, I'm just looking at this Zionist scum, and I'm not getting vibes of 20. I'm not getting 20,000 vibes. You know?
Well, I'm getting that he will even say that. You know what I mean?
I'm getting, yes, exactly. But this just shows the barbar. This is how pathetic they are, though. Because if my initial reaction is not only are you BSing, but I don't think you could hold your own against the Palestinian resistance. I don't know. I'm sure you've seen the videos, Nick. I think we've seen. Maybe much of your audience has also seen the Al-Qassam video journalism that they've been doing of their fighting. So while surely this literal scum has probably been involved in operations that have been, he could definitely be involved in operations that have been killing that number of Palestinians. This just goes to show that you have video footage of this, but you don't have video footage of the IDF fighting on the ground in this urban warfare situation in any kind of way that looks superior and strong. Yeah. You don't see them going toe to toe on video. They have smartphone. Hell, they have a lot of they have the ability They always have the thirst trap videos and the weird propaganda videos. They have the money to basically during the NBA playoffs, every other commercial is, oh, Israel, oh, anti-Semitism. You see it all the time in our media. They have the money, they have the technology. Mossad, come on, Mossad is one of the most sophisticated surveillance intelligence intelligence organizations. And when it comes to surveillance, they have the ability to definitely gather and garner footage of what's happening. They don't want to show us, and the reason is because when they actually do have to fight, when they're not just bombing and terrorizing Palestinians who are not involved in the armed wing of the resistance, they're just Palestinian people who are living their lives. That's who they can terrorize with their technology and their weapons. But when it comes to actually fighting, they don't stand a chance. And they know this. They talk like this because they believe they have immunity. They believe that they are superior. They believe that everyone that surrounds them, that they've occupied, that they've terrorized, that they're inferior. But at the end of the day, this is just barbarism. I mean, it is looking at scum. It's watching scum every single day. And these are the people that we are told, right? Because, we're always said, oh, well, what about the Israelis? What about the Israelis? And, unfortunately, while, you could probably say in the United States, if we were to maybe address the question of settler colonialism, there probably are like a lot of people in the United States who don't really subscribe to that. They wouldn't say, if you ask them, hey, are you for, hey, do you remember this is the indigenous nation that used to live here? Do you like agree with this process? Do you want things to change? I'm sure a good number of people would say, oh, well, I think it's reasonable to, give people some justice. This is not how Israelis think. This is they are the kind of last, they're like the last of the settler colonialists of a different era. They think most 90+% of Israelis right now are either just okay with what's happening or want an even harsher and even more genocidal posture. I did.
You see that poll where only like 4% of Israelis believe that Israel bombed Gaza too much?
Yeah,
people pretend that Netanyahu is a unique evil.
Yeah, exactly. That's the reality. So, and it's a reality that is shaped by politics. It's shaped by the ways in which Israel has been developed as this entity. The region, the axis of resistance calls it the Zionist entity. They don't acknowledge Israel proper, but this Zionist colonial entity. This is how they've been able to do what they do. Because if there was divisions about this, right, they're not at the historical stage, and they'll never will be. I mean, this genocide, this war, this really is the beginning of the end of Israel. We can see all the signs. So it's not going to flourish like the United States, right? There's not going to be some burgeoning consolidation for Israel inside of West Asia. The only path forward for Israel is the end of Israel, really, because unless the situation changes dramatically in the political sense, there's no shadow of a doubt that the axis of resistance will eventually end up in a cataclysmic conflict with this regime. And I don't believe that this regime can really survive that, because I don't believe that it would be restrained to just the region, and therefore everything will change after that. And so if that is the trajectory forward, then yes, people, these barbarous scum that we have the unfortunate we have unfortunate encounters with on social media. We watch these awful videos of how they talk. Truly, we are looking at just the worst that humanity has to offer, and we're also looking at the probably the end of this kind of regime. As much as it is hard to envision now, I just don't see this kind of social and political and economic order standing for much longer after such a thing like what we've witnessed since October 2023 runs its course.
And I'm gonna try to train myself to stop saying Israel in general and say the Zionist entity, that's a good idea. Because I hear a lot of people say that, and I'm gonna just stop saying Israel, because you gotta remember what our dear sister Josana used to say back in when we had the Nick and Josana show, when she said Israel, I'll call it Israel because Israel is not real. Like around the world, they don't acknowledge Israel. And then maybe I need to stop saying it, and that's what I'm gonna try to work on. I'm gonna just not even say the word no more. Just say the Zionist entity, and I think that's more accurate, to be honest, because the Zionist entity is the UK, Germany, the United States own Congress. And now what I'm gonna do right now, because I actually got a ton to cover, and we're about to wrap up. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go super rapid fire, as rapid fire as I can, and then I'm gonna pass it to you at the end, and we begin to wrap up, because I appreciate your time, and we can do this all day, so we definitely gotta have you back. So let me go back a little bit, because my original point, I'm gonna show you. I show you guys that guy's video, kind of in response to the Nina segment as well, because you guys see how Nina make the false equivalency between Hamas and Israel, or the Zionist entity. I despise that, because even the worst interpretation of Hamas doesn't line up with Israel. The worst interpretation of Hamas does not murder and execute the entire family of their enemies. So the interpretation of Hamas that the West has is that Hamas indiscriminately kills civilians. But what Israel does, they purposely wait till people go home and murder their entire family. Does Hamas have concentration camps, or does Israel does? So the point I am making is, if you're fighting someone as evil as a Zionist entity, they engage in activities like this, I will root for them, period. Look at this tweet here. And I get in trouble with this narrative. People push back on me, and I think it's fair to push back at me when I say that, when I talk about this. I had a great conversation with Lion Cosgrove. We had a great narrative about this. We had a great dialogue about this, because I really struggle with the concept of an Israeli citizen. I really do. Because look at this. Since the early morning of Jabalia refugee camp, we have retrieved around 70 decomposed bodies. Most of them were children and women who were killed by Israeli snipers, attempting to flee the camp. So the Zionist army, like that psychopath, when we can acknowledge that his number is bullshit, but how many of these videos have we seen, Danny? They just bragging about children they killed, snipers killing women. So, Danny, what people have you believe is that when these people retire from the IDF, that they're now civilians? Remember, in Israel, everyone is forced to join the IDF. And I'm smart, guys. I'm not talking about going after the people who go into prison because they refuse the IDF. Not to go after the religious people in Israel that refuse, take religious. I think there's a exception you can take that some do. Like if you are hyper religious, you can take an exception. So I'm not talking about those people. But in Israel, everyone has to serve the IDF. And I think the second you serve the IDF, you are a fair target. There's no such thing as an Israeli citizen, as far as I'm concerned, over the age of 18. Once you sign up to the IDF, once you don't get that dishonorable discharge, you are fair game. And I understand why people want to put back at that, but I see these fucking terrorists. Like, if you take part in the sniping of children, you are no longer get the right to call yourself a civilian for the rest of your life. That's my position. Let me move on, dude. I'll pass to you for a second time. I'm gonna try to go through some rapid fire stuff. Because we're gonna wrap up here very soon. Here, look, you guys see what the media, how they're twisting the terrorists. Like, that's not even a strong enough word to use, to be honest. Like, Nazi genocidal scum. We covered the concentration camp, and look how Associated Press covers it. Calls it a shadowy hospital. Once again, going rapid fire. I'm gonna pass you to you at the end here. One more thing I'm gonna cover, and I'll literally wrap it up here. This will be the last thing. I'm trying to get as much as we can this episode. Last thing I'll cover to show you guys the absolute barbarism of the Biden administration, as people talking about the Trump trials, because he paid off a porn star. Then they trying to turn to a felony because he's trying to overturn the election because he didn't want his family to know he paid a porn star. So as America is pretending this is the biggest fucking thing ever, the biggest controversy ever, Trump paying a porn star, you have this, which this alone, Danny, should be enough to get someone impeached in a rational society. This will be enough to start like Nuremberg trials. Listen to this. And I think I'll pull this one up because it sums it up quickly, and I'll pass it to you. I'm trying to get a lot done at the end here. U.S. State Department falsified report absolving Israel on Gaza aid. Now, I did a hotspot video about this as well, because you guys know I'm popping out banger after banger. Well, I covered how one of the people who quit the Biden administration quit because they work for USAID, and they blew the whistle on the Biden administration, falsifying reports about Israel letting aid into Gaza. And how many times, Danny, I know you've seen it, how many times did we see John Kirby, Biden, any of these spokespeople say, oh, Israel's doing everything they can to let aid in? The fact that you guys built a fucking failure of a pier, and the fact that you guys had to airdrop aid alone just proved that fact. So I had a lot said there because I wanted to get some headlines I definitely wanted to cover. So we're near the end there, Danny. I'll pass it to you for your overall thought. I know you got a lot of bounce on there, but any last thoughts before we begin to wrap up, Danny?
Yeah, I mean, this entire, I mean, everything that you showed in those headlines, there's just such a massive web of criminality that the United States is completely just imbued with regard to what's happening in Gaza. The United States, this has been, I think, just an increasingly apparent reality that the United States is not just aiding the genocide, but it is a full party. It is, if we think about Israel committing genocide, we really have to say the U.S. and Israel, or the U.S. - Israel, however you'd want to say it or write it. It is truly blood all over the United States' hands, and in particular the Biden administration's hands, and to the attempts to cover up the U.S. is not failures, but the U.S. is willing and complicit actions, looking away from allowing Israel to essentially do whatever it wants with U.S. weapons and U.S. Intelligence and U.S. personnel to have Israel treat the United States as it has during this conflict, because ultimately Israel is just so important to U.S. interests. I love to remind people of Joe Biden when he was talking to the Senate in 1986, where he's talking to Congress. He said that if Israel did not exist, the United States would have to create one in order to protect the U.S.'s national interests in the region. That is literally what, and it just so happens that Joe Biden is the top recipient of AIPAC money in the history of politicians receiving AIPAC donation. What a coincidence! He just happens to be the president.
Surely it's a coincidence.
He becomes president. Palestine decides to break out of prison, and then Israel is allowed to commit a genocide with U.S. help. So
I like that. I like the way you phrase it. I like the way I heard you say it on your show before, and if you don't mind, I'm gonna steal that because that's a great way to put it. Palestine broke out of prison. Yeah. Well said. Go ahead, Danny.
So that, all of this is to say is that it always reminds me too of when the United States they're still pushing this. I saw a Newsweek, Gordon Chang, the coming collapse of China, this absolute fraud who has been propped up by the most heinously overfunded, just clownish right-wing NGO sphere, Gordon Chang.
I showed you guys a few Gordon Chang segments. I decided to stop doing them. He's so absurd. Yeah. This guy has been predicting the fall of China for 20 years.
He recently wrote in Newsweek that the United States, by doing nothing against China, is helping China commit its genocide against Uyghurs. Meanwhile, and Newsweek published this thing. Newsweek published an article, while a literal genocide, one that is verifiable, documented. Literally, there's a case in the ICJ investigating this. And you have Gordon Chang talking about a mythical, completely, totally falsified claim of genocide against China. So this is just how low the United States has gone to maintain its supremacy. And the whole world is now seeing this. The whole world is watching. This is why you have even the most corrupt, the most untrustworthy, the most pariah states in many senses moving toward a multipolar world themselves, right? Because they are seeing that if they don't diversify their portfolio, they're going to go down in the explosion that the United States is spreading across the world. That is why you have Saudi Arabia doing all kinds of twists and turns and cartwheels to try to balance its relationship with the United States and grow a relationship with Russia, China, with BRICS. That's why you see even India. This is a country. I was just watching video today. It's so funny when they say, China and India's catching up. Look at India's growth numbers. 65% of people in India don't even have water in their homes. Like, it's absolutely ridiculous to try to compare China with India. Most people in India don't have running sewage system where they can defecate into. That is nothing like China, where they talk about toilet revolutions and basically China is the home of the highest and most innovative technology and development that exists on this planet. So it's just hilarious to think this. But even India, countries like India with very hostile regimes to China, India wants to, if it can, huddle under the U.S. orbit. But even India, because of the sanctions on Russia, because of which way the wind is actually blowing in the world, has had to get closer to Russia and has had to also make moves to settle things, especially on the border with China. So all of this is to say is that even these countries, which are not to be trusted, which have a lot of problems, which you couldn't say are part of the engine of multipolarity, they have to now make a decision about what they're going to do in their future. And I think that Gaza is another one of these big historical questions, these kind of epical shifts in the world, because a lot of people, Sabby asked me, okay, what do you think about European countries and these countries that are now stating that they stand with for a Palestinian state? They're reiterating support for a two-state solution. Well, it's significant. I do think the most significant part about this will likely be one, the strengthening of the axis of resistance and their increased role in a multipolar world, and two, it will be the rest of the world that is on the fence, that has maybe a lot of, unfortunately, chains around their neck, their arms, their legs, to the U.S. and Western financial, economic, and political world order. They're also going to look at this as another signal. It's like, well, if Russia, the sanctions, NATO encroachment, all this wasn't a signal that there's trouble afoot in the world order, well, allowing a genocide to stand as another flashpoint for World War III develops in West Asia, all of that, and let alone all of the machinations that the U.S. is trying to stir up in the Asia Pacific. If we just look at these two areas, Ukraine and Gaza, I mean, the rest of the world is looking at this with utter horror, and that means a lot more people are thinking about how can they join in on an alternative way of developing, a way of running and building the future in the world that we want to see. And I think that's truly going to be the consequences of all of this.
It's always great to have you on, Danny. Our conversation is always very thought-provoking. There's so many things we didn't touch on, but there's always time for another day. One last thing I will show you guys. Didn't ask us to do a segment on this, but I will bring it to your attention because it's so absurd. So the guy who got the ICC arrest warrant on him, the butcher of Gaza, one of the most horrific war criminals of my lifetime, invited to Congress, signed by all the top, it is bipartisan, the top 4 congressional leaders, all of them signed this letter. And I want you guys to vomit with me because I just skimmed this and I want to fucking vomit. His Excellency, Benjamin Netanyahu. I know how they always talk, but how does that not immediately disturb everybody? And I'll just read the first 2 paragraphs. I'll move on because I do want to bring this to your guys' attention. Last year, Congress was proud to host Israeli President Isaac Herzog in Washington to celebrate. Actually, let me close this. Better, easier to read like this. To celebrate 75 years of friendship and partnership between our two democracies. Hey, Democrats, the Democrats that signed this letter? I thought our democracy was at risk. Anyway, I want to be brief on this. Less than 3 months later, the horrific attacks on October 7th shocked the world and forced your nation into a fight for its very existence. We join the state of Israel in your struggle against terror. Oh, Jesus Christ. Especially as Hamas continue to hold American and Israeli citizens captives. Oh, I can't finish this. This is horrible. Anyway, I may cover this more in detail this week. For a second time, I'll move on. If you do one time on this, we about to wrap up. Big shout out to Rome. Big shout out to Sabby. Anything else you want to add, Danny, before we begin to wrap up here? Check your audio, Danny.
Sorry about that. No, I mean, there's again, yeah, as you said, there's so much that we can cover. This moment is just one example after another of the United States looking as it truly is, right? It's the mask off moment that we're always talking about. And the United States never really has any shortage of those when it comes to its foreign policy. But this is one example that people simply can't turn away from. And we live in an era now, and I was actually in Vietnam when this started. I actually had Ali Abu Nima right as October 7th, Operation Al-Aqsa Flood jumped off. And I was lucky enough to be able to get him on to talk about Al-Aqsa Flood. But then I was in Vietnam as the literal genocide began. And I just remember when I would get onto Twitter when I had time, and I would just look at what was being posted. And I'm like, this is just different. Like the way that people are reacting to this, how urgent it is, how accessible this content is becoming, how people can literally watch this genocide happen in real time. That is something that really hasn't happened, arguably, since the U.S. invasion of Vietnam, when a lot of people credit the changed public sentiment to the ability to access information via television, because there were actually war journalists. I went to a museum in Vietnam where you could see, it's called the War Remnants Museum. And in that museum, you can actually see there's a whole exhibit on the war journalists. This doesn't exist anymore. There aren't any real war journalists anymore. They're just embedded stenographers. But we are seeing that kind of happening again. So we can thank the Palestinian resistance really for this, because it's them who made it possible. They were the ones who started the prison break, who committed and engaged in one of the most effective acts of resistance in recent history. And then that led to such a harsh response, which I believe that we cannot, I don't think, I read Al Mayadeen, I try to read news from the region. And if you do read it, you see that there is no like, oh my God, Israel's doing this, right? Like, I think everyone understood who was engaged in the resistance, both in the axis of resistance and in the Palestinian resistance as one of its branches. They all understood that Israel's response was going to be incredibly bloody, incredibly brutal, and they did it anyway. And the reason why is because this was a calculated sacrifice to move the Palestinian cause forward. And in that sense, this has been a resounding victory for Palestine, even amid the massive suffering. This is the contradiction. I'm every time I talk about it now, this is what I'm going to bring up, because this is the contradiction I think people outside of Palestine, people outside of the region, right? Ansar Allah, for example, Iran, Iraq, these parts of the resistance know what genocidal behavior is like. I mean, look at what Iraq had to experience for, into today with since the U.S. Began to slaughter people there, starting in the first Iraq War. Iran has a long history of U.S. subversion, Israeli subversion, and the U.S. had a huge hand in the Iran-Iraq War. Covertly, and we can go on and on and on. Yemen has been through its own genocide. So people understand in the axis of resistance what genocidal behavior is, what the consequences of that are. The Palestinian resistance, I believe, understood all the same, and they did it anyway because it was the cause that was most important. And this is something that's hard for even the most progressive, even the most left, even the most supportive people of the Palestinian cause to understand. And I believe it is why it is so hard. It is one of the big reasons why it is so hard to pierce this demonization of Hamas, of Al-Qassam, of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, of the various resistance forces, it's because they're viewed as having somewhat of a hand to play in the cataclysmic situation that Palestinian people have found themselves in. But I don't believe the resistance for a second thought that Israel's response was going to be any more tame than it has been, because it was so successful. And I believe they thought it was going to be successful. I mean, we saw the footage on October 7th, October 8th. I mean, it was an absolutely humiliating moment. They completely undermined everything that Israel thought it had built, thought they had won over the course of many decades. And then now the humiliation is only, in my opinion, grown, because while Israel can tout that they've killed so many people, they cannot tout that they've done anything to stymie the resistance. They're still fighting in the north. They're still fighting in the center of the strip. They're still fighting. They're going to fight in Rafah. They're going to fight in these places indefinitely. So it really is going to be this protracted struggle, this protracted resistance. And I don't think it can win. I don't think the U.S. can change the situation. The axis of resistance has only gotten stronger the more and more the U.S. has pushed over the years, the more and more Israel has pushed. And now this is kind of a domino situation. Can Israel really withstand this kind of both public relations blunder, as well as a military defeat, as well as the fact that it does not have the capacity, short of nuclear Armageddon, to weaken the very forces that are in solidarity with Palestine? Palestine will never die. This is the problem that Israel is facing. You cannot kill a resistance movement. You cannot kill people. You just can't do it. It's never happened. You've never been able to. This is just not how social relations work. This isn't how human history works. This isn't how it really works. You know, you can kill, but eventually, just like the Vietnamese, just like Afghanistan, eventually the dominoes end up falling, and they don't fall on the side of the oppressor. And that's what we're seeing. So it's a really historic moment. On the one hand, exciting. On the other, incredibly grueling. And so, you know, I guess I would just say to people out there who are involved, who are paying attention to this, who are giving whatever they can in solidarity to the Palestinians and the global cause of peace, it's a long war. And so, you know, whatever we can do to stay in it for the long haul is important.
Yeah, great analysis as always. If you guys haven't, you guys have to follow Danny's channel. I appreciate your time today. Once again, you guys know we put in another banger. Just a few acknowledgments. If you guys have not seen this show between our boy Rome, who is back, our boy Rome is back stronger than ever. You guys know, man, you got these TikTok people. Rapbone is big on TikTok, so I'm catching up. I'm behind the curve, but Rapbone, powerful. Said I watched this episode. It was my introduction to you, brother. It's great to have you back in our community, because Rapbone also will be joining JB on the JB show. I don't think it's this Sunday. I think it's the Sunday afterwards. I had to check his calendar. The point is, guys, you guys see this new era. Big shout out to Zoya's Love, Zoya's Life. This new era. This is the kind of content you're going to get hit with a consistent basis. I mean, we just had Savvy and JB interview Garland Nixon. Now I just had Danny Shaw on. And then next Savvy and JB show, you guys think Savvy and JB about to calm down? No, they got banger after banger. Savvy just interviewed Danny yesterday. Now you got Amali from the Haru Black Socialist Movement. They joining. I have a Palestinian roundtable that we're planning for this next weekend. And guys, the people, the Palestinian organizers I have for this summit, once again, big shout out to the Palestinian Community Network for helping me put this together. That's a banger that's coming up. I got Dave DeCamp on Tuesday. If you come in this stream late, you got Danny, banger after banger, my friends. So you got a lot to catch up on this weekend. I'll be back on Tuesday. Once again, thank you again for your time, Dan. I'll pop you in the back. Yeah. Make sure you guys follow Dan on the channel. Any last shout outs?
Yeah. Well, actually, anyone, because I did share this on my YouTube community, so anyone who is here for my channel and isn't already subscribed to RBN or Savvy, so you can find that. I also shared that in my YouTube community yesterday. So definitely subscribe to them, because it's the work. honestly, a lot of what you cover too, I'm not able to cover in length anymore because I do run I made a calculated decision that I had to focus because I am doing a lot of my own production and all of that. So it just takes a lot of work, and that means that people like yourselves and RBN and Sabby and RBN as well, all of your work needs to be supported. So do subscribe to RBN, do subscribe to Sabby's channel, and be sure to follow what they have to say about everything, because they're not only anti-imperialists, but you all are covering the you're doing the grueling work that I have a hard time maintaining sanity covering anymore, which is the
No, man,
U.S.
dude, your
political
live
scene.
streams are so informative, dude. I like sometimes when I don't have a chance to read stuff, I'm like, oh shit, Danny covered it. He got me. Because I read a lot, but you can't get everything. But I love the work you do on your channel. And guys, you gotta follow it. Danny, he got banger after banger as well. They're bang after banger on his channel. Almost every show, you got another banger guest. It's great to see. Anyway, last thoughts, Danny.
Sure. Well, if you all are around later tonight, I think at 9, I do my streams late on the Eastern time side. I'll be live just doing a solo thing, covering the latest news out of Ukraine. And also there's been a report that I haven't covered yet that I've been itching to cover, which is NBC News talking. They were speaking with a former U.S. admiral about China's capabilities. And they're very, very worried that China can essentially end any kind of war over Taiwan in about 15 minutes. So I'm definitely going to be covering that, as well as the latest in Ukraine. And so do join me 9 p.m. in about 5.5 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, what's up, man? I'm definitely going to be watching. I'll put you in the back. Once again, thank you, as always, Danny. Great analysis, as always. I think that's all we have. I'll put the video of Rome and Ratbone. I got finished. It was a great conversation. I'm about 80% of the way through. Again, familiar with Ratbone work, and Rome is way more engaged, and he knows in the know in TikTok than I do. So yeah, so I told you guys, if you guys had doubted us for any moment, I told you guys this new era is about to be fire. Like, you guys doubted us, like, because Rome. Not only did we have Ratbone who about to be an ordinary guest, we got all these other TikTok influencers. Like, we reached out in networks the way we never did before. Like, you guys see the community that I'm building with DD Geopolitics. Like, guys, RBN is really lifting up to the next level. I'm very excited. We wasn't just blowing smoke. We were very excited about this new era and the freedom and what we can do with the channel. The organizing that I always wanted RBN to be. Like, I'm very proud that I think we're finally walking in that path that I always wanted RBN to walk. So I appreciate it. I think this is a good week. Give me some time to recuperate. I think I don't want to say for sure, but I know actually I don't want to say for sure because JB's moving. Usually JB shows on Sunday. I'll just say that. Next time I'll be live on Tuesday with David DeCamp. So you guys have a lot of content to catch up on. So hope you guys enjoy this one. Make sure you guys support us on Patreon. I'm also on Venmo as well. I'm going to update this with my link to my new Telegram channel. My Telegram channel is where you can find all my hotspot videos, update on streams and all that. I'm very late to the game, but I'm just now getting caught up on Telegram. So if you use Telegram, I'm going to edit the description, put the link in there so you guys follow me. Thank you guys for watching. Have a good weekend.